20, the LA Times' newest podcast unfolds as investigative reporter Joanne Farian quits her job to investigate how an unconscious man in a California nursing home ended up there for nearly 2 decades, and to figure out his true identity. Joanne is here to tell a little bit of the story because we don't want to spoil it at all. Hi, Joanne.
Hi.
You have to start everyone off by telling them whether you went looking for this story or did it find you?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I'm going to start off with my personal connection to this story. In 2008, my mother went from being very healthy to being in a medically induced coma. And on the 4th day, the doctors pulled my sister and I into a conference room and said, "What would your mother have wanted?" And I said, "She wouldn't want to live this way." And they literally pulled the plug. So I became obsessed with this idea of end of life and dying and started reporting on this. I spent a year reporting on hospice care and then another year reporting on people who are kept alive on life support.
How many in California?
More than 4,000 in California's nursing homes.
So you embed yourself in a nursing home. They let you do that in order to tell this deep
Exactly.
story,
I was
right?
working for an investigative news agency called iNewsSource at the time. And at about 8 months in, the head of the nursing home, Ed Kirkpatrick, said, "Do you want to hear something crazy? There's this guy that we've kept alive for 15 years. We don't know who he is, but they call him 66 Garage." So at that point, I convinced Ed that he should allow me to report on this man, 66 Garage, because maybe that will help for them to know his true identity.
Well, there's a lot of information you're given at the onset when you launch this journey that is completely wrong. But tell them what facts you were presented with.
Right. So Ed said, "We think he's an undocumented migrant. He was driving a van in the California desert when it crashed. The van was towed to a place called 66 Garage. That's how he got this crazy name. But I'm going to tell you right now that most of that is not true."
And neither is the age they
No, so
assumed
then
he was.
they also they had to guess a year that he was born. They said 1960. Well, that would have made him a middle-aged man, somewhere around 50-ish. And it was obvious the first time that I had seen him that he wasn't that age, that he was much younger. So that also becomes part of this mystery.
So where do you even begin? Because your story sounds, and again, I'm going to be very careful not to do any spoilers here, but it's like an episode, of Dateline investigation, some crazy episode of House, and a Lifetime movie all at the same time. Where do you even start?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I had reported on him somewhat before I left my job, and I had already went looking for a 66 Garage, I went looking for an accident report, nothing, I could find nothing, right? So where do you start? I started with embedding myself in this man's room, room 20, hence the name of the podcast, right? There's another reason other than my mother that causes me to quit my job. While I was reporting on him, and I was told he was in a vegetative state, I was in his room one day with Ed Kirkpatrick when he smiled at me. And this sort of gets to me to a point where I walk out of that room 20 with Ed and I say, "He's in there, Ed, you know he is."
And that is really
I can't let it go.
That is really what is driving you.
Yeah.
You just know he's locked in there, and so
Yes.
you chase down
Well,
the
I
science.
don't know. I actually don't know, and that becomes part of this mystery. So there's a couple things going on. Who is he really? That's the easy part. That gets solved right away. What happened to him in the desert? That's a really hard part. That's just shoe leather journalism, knocking on doors, searching for reports, documents, witnesses, and I find that out too. The third part, the most complicated part, is this idea of consciousness. Is he there? I end up in Canada in a lab, Adrian Owen's lab. He's a renowned researcher in neuroscience, and he does experiments where he literally puts people who are diagnosed in a vegetative state, he puts them in a functional MRI, he puts a helmet on them, and then he speaks to them. And he says, "Imagine you're playing tennis." And there's a very specific way our brains light up when we're playing tennis. And then he says, "Imagine you're walking through your house or your apartment." And again, another very specific way when we're doing those kinds of actions. So if your brain is lighting up the way a healthy brain lights up, then right away he's saying you're not in a vegetative state. The problem is there's this disconnect. When medicine is trying to diagnose people in so-called vegetative states, typically they've used behavioral tests. So in other words, they'll say to you, "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." What if you can hear that person but you're unable to squeeze your hand. Well, that's typically how doctors tested to find out if you were conscious. So now there are MRIs that now can do this sort of testing, but there's another kind of behavioral test that's being developed where a scientist or a doctor will hold up a cup in one hand and a pen in the other, and they'll say, look at the cup, right? So this isn't squeeze my hand or look at the pen. So there are more sophisticated tests now, which is some of what I learned on this journey.
All through this process, the staff you're getting to know, right?
The most compassionate people that you will find. Ed Kirkpatrick, who you meet early on, he is the head of the nursing home. He lets me in room 20. He doesn't have to do that. Why does he do that? So I actually asked him, Ed, why'd you do that? You took this risk, right? I'm a reporter. And he said, this guy's a human being, and we have to know who he is. He may have family somewhere. And his exact quote was, we have to CSI the hell out of it. And he often told me, look, I'm a nursing home director. I'm not a private detective. I don't know how to do this.
Joanne, I want to go back to where we started and how this journey began for you. Do you wish you knew the things you know now when your mother went to the hospital?
The thing is, when you're in this moment, right, it becomes very different, where you feel like, what if, right? And I think there's a line actually in the podcast, the villa, which is the name of the nursing home, is full of what ifs, right? What if I would have waited another week? What if I would have asked more questions? What if, something, they would have found some new medicine or something else? What if, right? And I think that at the end of the day, spending nearly 2 years in room 20, I think some of those what ifs went away for me, and I got some kind of resolution.
Joanne, it's wonderful. And again, we were very careful not to spoil anything. Podcast, such a wonderful way for LATimes Studio to tell this story and use your great reporting. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Joanne's 6-part investigative series, Room 20, runs on Tuesdays this summer. The first 3 episodes, along with the print companion stories, are available now at LATimes.com.